conference fieldwork video. So this is the third instalment in our student e-conference. So in our last two videos, the first one we were looking at landscape interpretation. So we were really thinking about building those skills and confidence to look at a landscape, look at an environment, and to interpret that, to really pick out those questions that you might be investigating when it comes to your independent investigation. So we looked at methods like the concept bingo, or we looked at frames or concept mapping, or annotated photographs. The second fieldwork video, which was all about our physical fieldwork skills with my colleague Jo, was really looking at carbon and water fieldwork techniques, doing sediment analysis, and also about vegetation, abiotics, and soil measurements. Today's fieldwork video is focusing on those human techniques. So we really hope that this is going to build the knowledge, skills and confidence within your human fieldwork methodology, to really hope that you guys at home as A-level geographers are feeling really confident to begin planning and perhaps collecting some of that data for your human independent investigation. So what will happen, we've got about a 30-minute or so video, and then at the end we'll do some Q&A. So if you do have questions that you would like to submit to us, and we'll answer them at the end, you can send them to this email address. So it is questions@field-studies-council.org. So any questions that send in, we'll be looking at picking a few of those and answering those towards the end of the fieldwork video. So you're going to be introduced today to a variety of different methods out in the field, those human fieldwork methods. Whilst you're sat at home, maybe watching this video, I would really recommend maybe making some notes on some of these key things here. So really thinking about, first of all, what's the purpose of some of these fieldwork methods? Then really think about beginning to justify how those might be used, why they might be useful. It's also really important at this stage as well to really think about the advantages and disadvantages of some of those fieldwork techniques. Maybe even you could begin to address some of those disadvantages within your methodology. Also, really important when it comes to the independent investigation is really thinking how you might adapt or tailor some of these methodologies so that they're really fit for purpose for your own independent investigations. And my colleague Robyn, who's presenting today's video, will give you loads of tips on that adaptation. Also, it's really important to think about how you're going to operate safely using some of these fieldwork methods. So thinking about risk and thinking about those safety measures. Always consider those ethical considerations within these fieldwork methods. And finally, it's really, really important to think about sampling. So thinking about your sample size, your sampling strategies that you're going to be using. So Robyn today in our fieldwork video is going to be touching on lots of these different things. So you at home might want to create a little table that can help document some of your notes from this fieldwork video today. So I really hope you enjoy this video. We hope it's really useful, and we look forward to answering your questions later on once the video is finished. So I'm just going to share our video and then we'll get started. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Robyn and welcome to this Human Fieldwork Techniques video done as part of the FSC and the GA's NEA Fieldwork e-conference. Our aim is to build independence and skills amongst A-level geographers when completing their fieldwork investigations. In this video, I'm going to be doing a few things. The first thing I'm going to be doing is introducing a few key human fieldwork methods that you can use. I'm going to be encouraging you to adapt these methodologies for your own inquiry questions, and I'm also going to be helping you develop an understanding of sample size, sampling strategy and ethical considerations for your own investigations. Now, I've come to Taunton today, which is my local town, and no matter what part of the country that you come from, you will have a human fieldwork location near to you, whether it be a large town like Taunton, it might be a large city like Bristol, or it might be a small town or a village in which loads of these human methodologies will still apply. With human fieldwork locations or with urban locations, there is a really broad scope for your investigations. You can investigate things like globalisation, place representation, regeneration. So there's lots of things that you can investigate. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you 3 different methodologies that you can use in detail to investigate your investigation. However, there's lots more out there. So the first method that we're going to look in more detail are questionnaires. Questionnaires, they're a really useful tool for gauging people's understanding and opinion of a certain topic that you're investigating. To design a perfect questionnaire, we use a 6-step process, which includes justifying, i.e. thinking about what information you're looking to gain from collecting your questionnaire, sampling, how are you going to sample, what's your strategy, how will it be used, whether you're going to speak to people face-to-face or whether you're going to use an online medium to do your questionnaire, designing it, so what types of questions you will use, piloting it, so trying it out, see if it works, what questions might you need to change, and then thinking about how you're going to collect and store all that information for your investigation. Let's take a closer look at each of those stages. I need to consider the mode of delivery for my questionnaire, whether I'm going to use something like a SurveyMonkey or a Survey123 and post that in a social media group to get responses or other online platforms, or I'm going to ask people face-to-face questionnaires. Now, at the time that I'm filming this video, we're currently in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, and government restrictions prevent me from going within 2 meters of other people. So asking a face-to-face questionnaire isn't really appropriate at the moment, so you might want to consider going towards a more kind of online approach. But obviously, if you are using that, make sure you're keeping yourself protected online. However, if we were in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, a busy high street such as this one would be perfect. It's also a really, really sunny day. The weather will have an impact. If it was raining, there wouldn't be very many people kind of walking around, but the weather's really nice. It's pedestrianised as well, so there's lots of places for people to stop and talk. I would want to consider the time that I'm doing my survey. Now, it's currently a Tuesday where I am, and lots of people might be at work during the day. However, if I was to go on a Saturday, I might get a higher footfall. Now, depending on what I was investigating, if I would needed a high volume of people to answer my questionnaire, I might need to consider that. Next thing we need to decide is how you will select people to take part in your questionnaire. And we're going to talk about sampling strategies. You might have heard of a few of these before when you did your GCSEs, but we're now going to think about how we actually apply those sampling strategies to actually doing something like a questionnaire. One sampling strategy that you may know of is systematic sampling. Now, that would imply in the context of a questionnaire, if you were to say sample every 10th person that walked past you along a high street. The only problem with that is that every 10th person that walks past you on a high street might not want to stop and chat, and it might end up being more of an opportunistic sampling strategy in which it's the people that do want to talk to you and do want to ask your questionnaire, which is okay because that's what happens when we do questionnaires. We also might want to consider stratified sampling. Now, if I was doing quite face-to-face questionnaires, I might think about doing it in 2 contrasting locations. It might depend on the type of question I'm asking about this environment. One area might be different than the other area. I might expect the people in these 2 areas to be different. If I was doing my questionnaire via an online platform, I might want to think about the types of maybe businesses I was sending it to select the people. We also need to think about the amount of data that we want to collect from these questionnaires, or our sample size. It's really, really good to think about these things before we actually go out to our field site and collect our questionnaire. Now, if I'm going to go to 2 different locations and get 1 questionnaire in each location, that's not reliable data. If I'm asking one person their opinion, it's going to be biased. I need a range of different opinions, hopefully from a varying demographic of people. When we're doing a questionnaire, we generally say about 50 questionnaires is quite a good amount to do for your questionnaires. But you might also want to calculate a response rate using this equation. There's no correct amount of questionnaires, but you will need to justify why you have the sampling size that you do. And obviously, the more questionnaires you get, the more reliable your data. Now, let's consider the design of our questionnaire. Now, when we think about designing our questionnaire, the first thing we might think of is the 2 main types of questions that you might have heard of already. First one is open questions. Open questions are where participants can give any response. and however length, they might talk at you for quite a long period of time. An example of an open question might be something like what I've written down here. Hopefully you can see this. In your opinion, what could be done to improve Taunton Town Centre? So if I was asking this to somebody or I'd sent this online, participants would be able to say whatever they wanted. Okay, and the advantage of doing that is we get lots and lots of data. I'm not categorising now, I'm not automatically assuming people's responses. However, it might make it longer for me to analyse. Another type of question is closed questions. Now, closed questions are where participants have to give a set response. So they don't give their opinions as such, or they might do if you've got a certain category for it. But there are a few different types of closed questions that you might want to consider using in your questionnaire. The first one is this that we call specified response question. The question I've got here is how did you travel to Taunton today? And I've put a few options for the people I asked, whether it's bike, train, walk, car or bus. So participants have to select one of those modes of transport. Often you have another category here that says other, just in case there's something that you haven't thought of as how people have travelled to Taunton today. Another type of closed question might be a tick box question. So the question example I've got here is, do you consider the following to be at risk from flooding in Taunton? And I've just put some tick boxes for the town centre, the industrial area, rural areas and residential. This is quite useful when you want to give your participants more than one option to select within their questionnaire. And the final type of closed question that you might want to consider is a rank style question. Now the question I've got here reads, please rank on a scale of 1 low to 5 high the quality of the environment in Taunton. And I'd have a scale at the bottom where my participants could just mark on a scale of 1 to 5 as to how much they like the environment, which is quite good if you're trying to gauge, I guess, how much somebody dislikes or how much somebody likes something or something about the environment. Whatever questions you decide to use in your own questionnaire, just make sure they're appropriate to what you're trying to find out. Also just consider the layout and the order of the questions that you're asking and the flow when you actually ask somebody these questions. You take to have your questions all in a jumbled order.
So when we think about designing our own questionnaires, it's best to start with this 6-step method. The first step that you start with is justifying. So that's thinking about what information you want to find out, what you need. Is a questionnaire the best method to get this information, and is there another form of data collection you haven't considered? What resources are available and what constraints might there be to you collecting this data? Then we need to think about sampling. How are you going to get people to answer your questionnaire? Where are the people who have knowledge to answer the questions? Is it on the high street or is it somewhere else? You need to send it somewhere. And how much data do you need to make any conclusions reliable and representative? There's no point in just going out and getting a few questionnaires. You need to get a range of different answers and a range of opinions. Then how will you be used? What is the mode of delivery? For each question, you need to consider how it will be presented and analysed. The next stage, then we're thinking about design, thinking about what types of question, the wording, the flow, order and layout, and how are you ensuring the informed consent of your respondents. Then we can move on to piloting, testing it, seeing how well it works, how valid is the data that you're collecting, and finally we can go on to collection and storage of the questionnaire data.
Another method I can use to look at the human environment is looking at the environmental quality. Now, I could just describe the environmental quality behind me. I could comment on things that I like about the environment. Is there lots of open space? Are there nice things like flowers in the area? Also, I could look at the things that I dislike in the environment. For instance, is there a lot of noise or is there a lot of traffic? Now, if I was to go to lots of different locations around Taunton and just describe what I'm seeing, I'm going to become a bit stuck then when I start to interpret and analyse that information, because I might have too much data. So I'm going to use something called an environmental quality assessment, which allows me to look at different locations around the human environment I'm investigating across a range of different indicators. Now, the first environmental quality assessment that I'm going to use has a bipolar scoring system, and by that I mean it just goes from positives to negatives when I'm scoring it. The highest number I've got here is 5, the lowest number I've got here is -5. Minus numbers indicate a low environmental quality, plus numbers, positive numbers indicate a high environmental quality. And on the kind of columns, on the rows here, I have listed what we think kind of deems an indicator of the environmental quality. And this isn't just stuff that I've made up. I might have done some research before I've done this and gone on websites like Keep It and Tidy, who actually have their own environmental quality survey and a methodology that I could copy for my own. While I'm scoring it, I might pick a location, the location to take my sample, and I'm going to look at the kind of near environment right around me. So if I'm having a go with this environmental quality assessment for the environment behind me, I'm going to start with this first category here, which is open space. So if I thought it had large amounts of open space, I would give it a +5. If I thought it had very little open space and the buildings were very close together, I might give it a -5. I don't think there's not a lot of open space, but equally I don't think there's massive. There's not a big open green or anywhere I can kind of, go and relax, because there's a big busy road here. If I had a kid in this area and stuff, I wouldn't be comfortable letting them just run around. So actually, I'm going to give it maybe a 1 for this environment. Let's look at the next category, which is noise pollution. While I've been filming, there's been quite a lot of cars that have been driving past, and it's quite noisy here. There's quite a lot of people walking past. So I'd say noise pollution is actually quite high here due to this main road mostly. So I would maybe score it a -3 or a -4. I would then add up all the scores that I've given this location to get a total environmental quality score that I could compare across all the locations. I also might want to use a weighted category system, because some indicators will be more relevant than other indicators in determining what makes environmental quality. For example, if I deemed that the noise pollution was far more important than actually something like having street lights, I might give a higher weighting to that category. Whatever method I do use to look at the quality of the environment, if that's something I choose to look at, it's really important that I adapt my categories depending on what I'm trying to investigate. There might be a certain aspect of the quality of the environment that I'm looking at. I might not even be looking at the environmental quality. I might be looking at indications of crime in the area and using that on a category instead. I might be looking at indications of an inclusive environment and look at signs that there's disabled access and stuff in shops. So there's lots and lots of things that I can look at with this kind of system, not just an environmental quality survey. Considering a method such as an environmental quality assessment, you need to consider the amount of data that you're going to collect, because you're taking what would otherwise be qualitative data into a quantitative form and reducing all the information you get in one area to one number. So it wouldn't be appropriate to just collect that number once in one location, and once in another location we need to think about getting a reliable sample size. As we did with questionnaires, we also need to think about the sampling strategy when it comes to thinking about our environmental quality assessments. You might again have heard of these 3 sampling strategies, but we can think about how we can apply it to an EQA. If we were doing a systematic sampling strategy, we might choose to walk along a high street and sample maybe every 100 metres, and that would allow us to see changes as we move across a high street. If we were to do a more random sampling strategy, this might involve taking a map of your location and actually putting a grid on top of it, then using random numbers to generate random locations and random squares in which we're going to do our environmental quality assessment. You could also consider a more stratified sampling approach. This would be appropriate if I was looking at maybe the differences in 2 contrasting areas. So I would pick 2 locations that I would expect to be different from each other and sample lots of times in both those locations, and that would be stratified sampling.
So the first sampling strategy that I'm going to talk about is systematic sampling. Systematic sampling involves sampling at regular intervals. On this map, I've also drawn a few transect lines to investigate Taunton Town Centre, rather than just having one, I have a few to get more reliable data. Now, on one of the transect lines, I have marked on my sample points roughly every 100 metres along my transect. It's really good if my inquiry question might be looking at changes with distance from something, or changes with distance from the centre, or changes with distance towards something that might have an influence. And it's important to bear in mind though that while I can mark these locations on a map, when I actually get to Taunton, I need to check whether it's actually safe to observe and record data in those locations, and I might need to adapt when I do a dynamic risk assessment. Another option would be random sampling. There's a few ways you can do this, but one thing that you could do is you could take a map of your location. So I'm using Taunton here, placing a grid across it, then using either a random number generator on your phone or online to generate random coordinates or random kind of grid squares in which you're going to carry out your sample. You might want to, I've just done it over the whole location here, but you might want to pick maybe 2 locations in this area and then do your random sampling in that. So you can combine 2 different sampling strategies. One problem with this method would be that I might end up with all my sample locations in one side of my grid square, which wouldn't be very helpful. So it's worth bearing in mind if you are using that. However, true random sampling should mean that there is no bias in where you've chosen to do your sample points. So the final sampling strategy that I'm going to talk about is stratified sampling. Stratified sampling is using your prior knowledge to choose locations which you're going to sample. In the example that I've got below, I have used data from the Index and Multiple Deprivation 2019, which ranks all the lower layer super output areas in the UK into how deprived they are based on a series of indicators. Now, as you can see, from my map here, I have chosen 2 different locations where I expect there to be a difference based on the change in colours on the choropleth map here. Now, I've marked 2 crosses on the map, but these are just marking the areas. Within these areas, I would definitely want to collect more data, so I would be able to have a reliable data set. So it's really useful if my question was looking at 2 contrasting environments or the difference in 2 locations or areas.
One of the limitations of an environmental quality assessment is its subjectivity. When I was giving scores earlier to things like open space and noise pollution to whatever environment I was in the centre of town, you might have disagreed with the scores that I was giving it. And that's okay, because that's the quality of the, that's what the environmental quality assessment is. It allows us to make quick observations, but it is important to bear that in mind when we interpret and analyse our data and evaluate. Now, another method that you might have used before in a human environment is a pedestrian count. Pedestrian counts are really good if we're looking at flows of people, but actually we want to take that to the next step now and think about how we collect more qualitative data with that information. And we as geographers can use observations as a way to collect data. Now, when you're observing the environment, we're thinking about how are people behaving in this area, what are they doing, maybe how are they dressed, and maybe just who is in this area. And you can get 2 types of observation. You can get participant observation, in which you might actively participate within a group of people, or you can get a non-participant observation, in which you don't engage, you just purely observe. You also get observations that are overt, in which case people know or are aware that they're being observed, and you also get observations that are covert, where people aren't aware that they're being observed. Now, for your A-level geography investigation, a non-participant covert observation will probably be the ideal option if this is a method that you're considering doing. Now, it's quite hard to just sit there with a piece of paper and then start observing your environment. So it might be easier for you to draw up some form of template to help you do this. I've just got one here, and I'll just read out the things that I've got on my template, which are things that you might want to think about when you're observing the environment. So we've got things like appearance, clothing, age, gender, physical appearance. We've got verbal behaviour and interactions, physical behaviour and gestures, the use of space, human traffic, and people who stand out. And those are things that you might want to look at in your observations. And it also means that if you're observing in one location, such as here, and then I go to another location at the other side of Taunton, it means that I'm looking for the same indicators when I'm observing, like when I was using the environmental quality survey. When you are recording your observation, it's also quite good, and it's a really useful opportunity for us to actually add our own geographical interpretation to our observations, which is part of the beauty of a non-participant observation. So, i.e., if you do see people, lots and lots of people walking around, they're looking down at the ground, their shoulders are hunched, they're not looking, they're not engaging in the environment, in front of them, what does that say to you about the environment? If there are people walking very fast, in a hurry, and they're not stopping to chat, what does that tell you about what the environment allows people to do? When you're recording the data from your non-participant observation, it might be worth finding a nice kind of open area where you can sit and observe people for a period of time. You might want to sit on a bench, there's a few around here. If it's a nice day, you might just want to sit on the grass and just people watch what's going on around you. You might want to focus on a particular group of people, you might want to focus on the entire area. It's up to you how you record this information. You might want to say, I'm going to sit in this area for 5 minutes at a time and record what I see, and then that way you can make sure you're doing it the same in this location and the other locations where you might choose to do. Sampling strategies still apply with this as well. You can still do your systematic, stratified, random sampling that you did with something like your environmental quality observation. When we're thinking about ethical considerations of a non-participant observation, you need to be aware that you are watching people, and you don't want to make it obvious that you are watching a group of people. Do people change their behaviour if they're aware they're being observed? So make sure you're not obviously observing the environment. The other thing you will want to make sure you do, and it's quite tempting sometimes, if you don't want to write everything down, just to film. Now, if you are filming people, you're actually collecting information that you shouldn't be. So make sure you don't film the people that you are observing, because we can't store that information. You don't have permission to. So those are just a few things to consider with the ethics if you're collecting a non-participant observation. Now, some of you might be thinking, what next? What do I do with all this information that I've collected, and how do I put it into my investigation when I write it up? With quantitative data, students tend to be a bit more confident in how we can present that. We're used to reading reports, doing investigations in other subjects where we can put in bar charts, pie charts, scatter graphs, etc. However, when it comes to large amounts of qualitative data, so large amounts of text-based information, we're not so sure about how to put that into our investigations when we write it up. But that's okay, because there's loads of ways that we can do that. It just might require a little bit more research from us. Good places to go are places like things like this creative fieldwork guide that's produced by the FSC and the GA. And there are lots of different and creative ideas about how you can analyse and present some of your qualitative data. Coding is a really useful tool for where you can start. Coding helps us identify key themes in our large bit of text. It also helps us identify trends, and it can also enable us to turn some of our what would be qualitative data quantitative for us to put into our investigations. So it's really important to consider that within this video, I've shown you 3 methodologies, and you can use the techniques of those methodologies to apply to different methods to help you with your investigation, but there is so many more different ideas out there. The most important thing to consider when you're deciding on your methodology for your investigation is, does the data that you collect from that methodology enable you to answer your inquiry question? Because fundamentally, if your data doesn't actually help you answer your question, then that's actually not very useful. So when you're deciding and adapting your methodologies, really consider this. And there's lots of further places that you can go for support with your investigation. I've showed you the creative fieldwork publication done by the FSC and the GA. There is also the amazing RGS Student's Guide to the Investigation. And there's also the FSC Geographical Investigations Guide for A-level students. And there's a lot more out there if you search for it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you feel that you have more human fieldwork methodologies in your toolkit than you maybe did at the start of this video, and it's given you a starting point, I guess, for you to go off and explore. Thank you very much.
Hi there, welcome back. Thank you for watching our video there on human geoskills. And I'm really pleased to announce that I've got our expert field tutor from our video, Robyn, joining me today for our Q&A. Hi, Robyn.
Hello.
Thank you so much for putting together that video. Some really useful top tips in there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I've got a question personally before we go to the Q&A. I'm really interested to know, you spent time in that human environment, you've been in Taunton, but what's your favourite thing about investigating a human environment?
I think with a human environment, it's just very accessible to everyone, because no matter where you come from in the UK or elsewhere, you have access to a human environment. And it's really easy to think about stuff and investigations that might relate to a human environment. And I think everyone feels very connected to them.
I completely agree. They feel quite dynamic as well, and no place is the same. So whatever you're investigating in a human environment, it feels quite unique and special to that particular location. So that's one of the reasons I really like those. So thank you for that, Robyn, telling me a bit of insight into why you enjoy investigating human environments. So we're going to tackle some of the student questions that are coming in. So just a reminder, if you do have any questions, you can send them to us on this email. I'll leave that up for just a moment longer. So send them to us, questions@fieldstudiescouncil.org with hyphens in, and we will try and tackle them. But we're going to tackle our first question that has come in. So our first question is actually all about qualitative coding, and that was something that you referenced in your video there, Robyn. So this student has said she's never done any qualitative coding before. What are some of your top tips to starting qualitative coding?
I think coding is quite a hard skill when you haven't done it before. So starting easy is probably better. And probably the best way to start is actually by taking if it's on a video or something that you've recorded, you might want to transcribe it. What you might want to do then is take your text and start reading through it line by line. And once you do that, you can start thinking about categorizing it into kind of simple themes. And you might want to start with just categorizing it into, that's a positive statement or that's a negative statement. And then once you've kind of done that and got to grips with how to do that, you might want to think about creating some more themes, maybe based on your inquiry question, maybe based on a particular model that you're looking at or you're studying. And then you can go to do some more in-depth coding and even start counting up how many times those themes occur and make your qualitative data quantitative, and eventually you might even be able to do statistics on your data.
Oh, there's some really lovely top tips there. Thanks, Robyn. And if I could just, I guess, add to that top tips from my experience is one of our colleagues, Charlie, she did a fantastic session at the GAE conference earlier in the year, and that was all on, it had a great title. It was about word clouds, and it was about really thinking about get your head out of the word clouds and really think about qualitative coding. And she worked through lots of different worked examples. So and that's a really good session download. You can download that free from the GA website at the moment, and there's loads of good worked examples in there. And also within creative fieldwork, there are some worked examples within that publication as well, which you referenced. And I guess when I first started learning about qualitative coding, I went on TripAdvisor and I kind of looked at how people were reviewing certain places, restaurants, locations, and that gave me the big chunk of text that I kind of wanted. And that's when I then began looking through that for some of that information. So that's kind of how I began with some of my qualitative coding. So we hope that's really useful for some top tips from Robyn, Charlie, our colleague, and myself there. So hopefully that will help you in your qualitative coding journey. So we've got another question coming in, and it's something that you talked about in your video again, Robyn, but a student has asked, can I just find an environmental quality survey online and just use that? What would be your advice there?
It can seem really, really tempting, I guess, if there's one you can really easily download off the internet. Oh, I'm looking at environmental quality and there's one here that I can use straight away. But I would say don't do that, because it's really unlikely that the categories on that kind of off-the-shelf environmental quality assessment will match up to the ones that you might want to specifically look at for your location and your inquiry question. So you might want to really think about what is unique about where you're going, what particular things are you looking for, and do a bit of research online into a particular, you might have a particular aspect of your inquiry question you want to delve deeper in with doing something like an EQA, and you might want to put particular emphasis on more of the categories or add more kind of subcategories, I guess, for your own EQA. And it's really important to justify why you've chosen to use the methods that you're doing.
I completely agree, Robyn, and that bit about justifying and making sure it's really tailored to your investigation are some really key kind of top tips. And I think that applies whether it's an environmental quality assessment, whether it's a questionnaire, what you're asking or the data that you're collecting really needs to be applied. And I guess if I was just adding a bit more to that, is I'd maybe say some of those categories can be quite hard to come up with, and you're thinking, well, these are great on this online survey, they're already there. But using some maybe secondary sources to help populate those categories can be really helpful. So you referenced Keep Britain Tidy within your video there. Also, Egan's Wheel is really good for sustainability categories within there. So there's lots of different maybe models or secondary sources that you can use to help you with those categories, I guess. You don't have to just sit on your own kind of thinking, oh, what are those categories going to be? Do a bit of research. There is help out there to populate some of those categories. So thanks for that, sharing that tip there, and a bit of advice on using off-the-shelf methodologies there. Thanks, Robyn. So we have got a question now about what models, what theories, and what concepts are kind of useful in human geography investigations. So what are some of the models, theories, or concepts that you've come across, Robyn, that you think apply really well to human fieldwork investigations?
So recently, I guess the ones that I might have looked at are the Project for Public Spaces, and they've got a really, really good kind of diagram on there that is about what makes a great space. And you might want to think about designing your question or sub-questions off maybe kind of some of those kind of those kind of categories in that model. Also maybe designing some of your methodologies or observations based on that. Another really good one that I've come across recently is the Healthy High Streets report, which basically looks like how healthy are our high streets, and it has a methodology in it that actually kind of rates different types of shops based on a health rating, which I think is brilliant, because you could just take that and put that, and adapt it towards your own NEA, and that's real world methodology that you're using. Other things that you might want to consider are maybe transition towns, so looking at how communities can help within their towns, garden towns as well. There's lots more out there that I'm sure you can name some as well, Janine.
Yeah, so I think some of my favourite ones, I guess, is I came across a really nice one about, it's called town centre classification. And it was all about labelling a town, whether it was a global superstar or whether it was a more kind of local kind of home player. And it was a really interesting, quite modern way of really thinking about classifying town centres. So I really like that one. I also quite like the home zone concept, which is all about urban design and really designing urban environments for people and not necessarily just about traffic or but really thinking about design for people, design for play, and trying to find those kind of play space interactions. So I really like some of those concepts as well. But like Robyn said, there are absolutely tons of information out there with models, concepts about urban geography, and so do some research, find something that really interests you. Robyn mentioned the project for public spaces. That is a fantastic place to find lots of information about urban geography there. So really check those ones out. So hopefully that answered your question, Catherine, that came in. We've got a question just come in from Jack, which is all about top tips with online questionnaires. So I think this one is so relevant to right now in the kind of current climate that we're working in. We might be collecting questionnaires in this manner rather than face to face. So I'll share some of my top tips, and then Robyn, perhaps you can chip in with some as well. So one of my kind of top tips would be to start designing it first of all, and then test it within a small group of people that you know. So you can almost send it out by email to some people that you know. They can have a go at filling it in, and then you can then speak to them and say, how was that questionnaire for you? Did it work? Did it flow? And so you can get a kind of audience understanding of what it was like, because you can speak to them. But then also you can look at your questionnaire design, then retailor it, and really thinking about whether it is, suitable to gather those answers that you need to help you tackle your investigation. So that would be my first top tip. What about you, Robyn, with online questionnaires?
Yeah, I was thinking about the more kind of because you're losing the face-to-face element of when you ask people questionnaires, and if they bounce a question back at you to ask you a question about your questionnaire, you can't do that. And sometimes maybe you're asking about the regeneration scheme in an area, and not everyone is going to be totally maybe clued up on that regeneration scheme. And obviously if you spoke to somebody in the field, you could then tell them about it in the field, but you might want to think about putting all that extra information into that questionnaire. You can also use really, really good things like Survey 123 to help design your questionnaire, and really kind of, I guess this touches on what Janine says as well, really think about the types of groups that you're going to be putting it into, and think about sampling strategy, because just because we're not in the field collecting our questionnaire, it's really important to consider, systematic, stratified. It's going to be a little harder to do for questionnaires than other bits of data, but it is still possible to think about and justify that sampling strategy for your questionnaire.
Thanks, Robyn, and some really good top tips. I completely agree. I think Survey 123 from ArcGIS will be absolutely superb for collecting some of these online questionnaire data. And I guess my final thing to add there is I'd be prepared to get quite a lot of questionnaires back. I think that it's almost quicker to set up, and then you send out your questionnaire, maybe in an email group, maybe in a Facebook group or something like that, and you'll have to be conscious of that social media guidance and ensuring e-safety, but it's going to be much quicker to get a huger volume of responses back. So really important that you're prepared to go through and tackle all of that data that you've come in. It's great from a reliability point of view and great from a representative nature of the conclusions that you draw, but you're going to have to tackle a lot of data with that. We've probably got time, just looking at the time, for one final question. So our final question that we've got coming in is, how big of an area should we be investigating during human fieldwork? What are your thoughts on that one, Robyn?
If you're investigating a small village, it can be quite easy to have your area as the village, because it's quite small, it's manageable. You can get the level of precision in your data collection that you want to in that area. Obviously, you can still think about sampling strategies, but if I'm thinking of a big city near me like Bristol, you're not going to be able to investigate the whole of Bristol. So you're going to need to properly think about your samples. And it might be, one of the examples in the video was talking about stratified sampling. And in that particular example, it talked about 2 different areas of Taunton, for example, that had a different IMD score, a different index of multiple deprivation score. So you might want to maybe choose 2 areas, or, you know, however many areas would help you answer your question, but you want it to be a manageable kind of amount of data collection within the time that you have to complete your investigation. And just remember, you're not going to, if you try and cover the whole kind of city, you're not going to get the level of precision in your data than you would if you just focused on smaller areas.
Yeah, that's really, really important, isn't it? You know, focusing an investigation on a city like Manchester, that isn't going to be focused enough, and you might need to focus mainly on a small area of Manchester, maybe even a couple of streets. You might also use, I guess, census data and census data areas to help you choose some certain areas. So something like a lower super output area, like you mentioned in your video, that has around kind of 650 households within that. So that might be a way of kind of delineating the areas that you look at. And I guess if I was adding a final bit to that question that we've just been asked there, is if you are comparing areas, that's also really important to make sure that the comparison is appropriate. So you're not comparing somewhere like Manchester as a city with a tiny village in Devon, for example. They're not appropriate. They're in different locations, they've got different demographics, but the sizes are really different as well. So really making sure that you are comparing locations appropriately, and using something like the census output areas, like lower super output areas, can really help to make sure that that comparison is appropriate, because they are matched to those number of households. So that would be my kind of final top tip, I guess, with that bit. So we've kind of come, looking at the time, to the end of our kind of Q&A section now. We really hope this has been useful to you in kind of building that knowledge, skills and confidence to help you guys tackle your independent investigation. I know there's a wealth of information within there, those videos, this one and our 2 previous ones as well. Don't worry, you can watch them back on YouTube. You'll be able to pause them, revisit different bits, because we know that that's going to be really useful for you when you're doing your independent investigation. So go back, look over the review tasks, and really consider how these might be useful to help you when you're planning and collecting and writing up all of your work for your independent investigation. There's been loads of links and references to things throughout, so probably you've got food for thought and further research that you're now going to be doing. So good luck, and we hope you enjoy your independent investigation journey. You can watch these back, but thank you very much for tuning in and watching us. Thanks now.
Thank you.